Folks are high on Oklahoma competing for a national championship. We know that they've owned the Big 12 for the past 6 seasons. We got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football. Of course, this is the voice of college football, and we invite you to comment down below your thoughts on the Sooners for 21. Of course, like the videos and share out on social media. Jason, how are we doing today?
Doing good, Mark. Thanks for having me on. I think one of the things that we talked about a little bit from spring, we got a little bit of clarity this week. Lincoln Riley announced that the spring practice will officially start March 22nd. So we don't have a spring game date yet. It's looking like mid to late April, but at least we have a date to kind of march forward to in terms of starting the spring practice.
Let's look at the defensive line. I think people would be surprised unless they really locked in on Oklahoma football last year that Alex Grinch has done a remarkable job. They were 15th in the nation in S&P plus total defense. That's the advanced metric measuring across the board in regards to getting way beyond just the surface statistics and how effective and dominant the defense was. And it was a top 15 defense in 2020. One of the main reasons why, Ronnie Perkins, despite a short season, despite missing time, still racked up 10.5 tackles for loss and 5.5 sacks when he's given all the attention. So that's obviously a huge loss to start out from along the defensive front.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. That's the biggest guy that they have that's not coming back, certainly for the 2021 campaign, and someone certainly that they're going to have to look and see how they're able to replace him. Yeah. As you mentioned, the latter part of the year in 2020, Ronnie Perkins was very disruptive. He was really maybe the catalyst behind the turnaround from a defensive perspective the latter half of the year in 2020. So, and I think starting with your initial point, Mark, just in terms of, a lot of the optimism and the excitement. The offense kind of is what it is. I think Oklahoma fans and people across the country have come to expect the success that Oklahoma has had on the offensive side of the ball with, certainly with the quarterback and the running backs and receivers that they've had. But I think, when you talk to people, I think the biggest point of optimism is really on the defensive side. And it's really kind of exciting to talk about Oklahoma's defense, whereas it's been something that, you kind of, as in the past, kind of shy away from it and not really anything that's very exciting to talk about. But in year number 3 for Alex Grinch, as you mentioned, as a defensive coordinator, I mean, I think some of the stats that you talked about, yeah, you can make what you want of stats, but I think 5 key stats that I was kind of looking at is very indicative of how much improvement Oklahoma has made. Total defense from 2019, they went from 114th to 29th in 2020. Third down defense, they were 118th in 2019, 4th in 2020. Turnovers, it's just the staple of the Alex Grinch defense. One thing that he's really kind of harped on is getting turnovers, and Oklahoma has struggled really in that area until the last half of last year. In 2019, 120th, 19th last year in two games. And I think as we talk about the defensive line here, I think one of the big areas that Oklahoma has improved, and it's really made their secondary a little bit better as well, is the ability to get to the quarterback. They had 39 sacks last year compared to 28 in 2019. And of course, that's counting the shortened season, 2 less games that they played last year. So I think that's a big, exciting part of what Oklahoma's being able to do this year, or what they anticipate being able to do this year is on the defensive front. But certainly you have 3 guys that have played a lot of football for Oklahoma, and you kind of morph into a linebacker perspective. We'll get into the linebackers, I know, here in a little bit, but from a rush end linebacker, you got Nick Benito, who was second in the team in sacks last year with 8 sacks, coming back from the rush end perspective. He will certainly play in coverage a little bit, but he does a lot of his damage at the rush end. And then you have Perrion Winfrey, who was the nose tackle last year, really, was kind of up in the air whether or not he would come back for this season, is back, manning the middle. And then Isaiah Thomas, who was the team leader in sacks with 8.5 sacks over the course of the year, is back as well. So you have those 3 guys that are probably NFL guys, maybe second or third round, maybe fourth round type of guys that are coming back that have, a lot of sacks and a lot of quarterback pressure, and has really kind of solidified that defensive line for Oklahoma. One thing to kind of point out and to think about in terms of the depth for Oklahoma, Jalen Redmond is coming back this season, opted out in the 2020 COVID year for Oklahoma, has had some issues with injuries, specifically blood clots over his career. So I think he thought that was a little bit too risky with everything going on this year. 2019 had 6.5 sacks for Oklahoma. Will be very interesting to see what Grinch does with Isaiah Thomas and Jalen Redmond. If he's ready to go, not necessarily in the spring, obviously, but as we get into fall practice and game time. Isaiah Thomas played inside more at a defensive lineman position as opposed to a defensive end. His natural position, specifically at the next level, probably looks like is going to be at the end, whereas Jalen Redmond's natural position was really more inside in 2019. So I would kind of look for Alex Grinch to move Isaiah Thomas back outside a little bit to a defensive end position to allow that all those four players to be on the field at one time for Oklahoma. Really solidifies that defensive line, and they've got several people, from a depth perspective. One thing that Grinch has harped on and talked a lot about is really the lack of depth that he had at Oklahoma really coming in this year. I think they're going to be comfortable going 3-4 deep at the defensive line position and like linebacker position as well.